Alrighty, we're going to get started. I am Rachel Frey, and I have a group here from Deloitte Consulting that's going to talk this afternoon around using a data-driven approach to analytics. I have with me today Brian Lorenz. He is from our forensic accounting practice and is going to talk a little bit this afternoon around the topic that is very near and dear, I think, to Dave and my heart as well, which is around the topic of fraud, waste, and abuse and program integrity within state government agencies. Dave is going to talk a little bit about workforce planning and how we prepare organizations around retention and attraction for our workforce and making sure that they have the skill sets. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about customer segmentation this morning, or actually rather this afternoon. Talk a little bit about customer segmentation. And before I get into customer segmentation, I just wanted to talk a little bit around how we would define what customer segmentation or customer experience analytics really entails. What customer experience really entails, and I'll use a little example of something that I did about 11 years ago. I worked with a large auto manufacturer, and they were having challenges with trying to figure out how they could bring in more people into their service centers. They were having a significant problem with an underutilized garage, and they were trying to figure out, well, who am I really going to get in to come in and use my services? Who needs brake services? Who needs to get an oil change? What could I offer to these individuals to try to increase the utilization around my particular dealerships? And it's this 10 years ago that we're now starting to see similar things that are breaking into the public sector arena. It's around understanding who the customers are. It's around understanding what their needs are, where they're located. And in years past, what we really looked at in terms of customer segmentation is we've had a lot on basic transactional analytics or data. That's not anything that's new. We know, you think about in the example with the auto manufacturer, there's touch points that they have or repair records. There's loans that people have had. Those are things that aren't different today than they were before. But things have changed now. There are new touch points that people have. There are new things in terms of what we call implicit related events that actually take place. And I'll think a little bit about this and relate this a little bit to a state government example. Today we've seen where we have individuals, if we would take an example of unemployment insurance. And we have individuals that today are transacting with the Employment Development Department in California, or in this case, I'm actually going to use an example from the state of New Mexico. And we have these individuals that are filling out claims on a weekly basis. We know information about how much they're getting paid. We may know information about their address. We may know information about their job or their income. But there's things that are implicit in the way that they're interacting and behaving that are new. And these are new things like the times that people are actually submitting their claims may have ended up being pretty consistent. We're all pretty much creatures of habit. And one of the findings that they found by using some of these implicit analytics is looking at if somebody tends to submit their UI claims at 6 o'clock in the morning frequently, and then all of a sudden 6 months later, that individual is now submitting it at 4 in the morning, or maybe they're submitting it at 8 in the morning, and something in their life has changed. There's an event that has changed. But these aren't things that necessarily that individual is going to be able to report, and it's not something that you can necessarily glean from having a conversation with them. But these are behaviors that now we have that are new, that are implicit, that we can take and integrate with those more transaction-oriented analytics that we've used in the past. So the things that have changed now is we have more touch points a lot with our customers today. We have mobile devices now where people are getting access to state government more often. You have IVR technologies. You have a number of different ways in which people are interacting with government that have changed in the past that are giving us more insights into individuals that can then be married with traditionally within our systems today. So it's the marrying of some of these new interactions and new insights. We had a poll everywhere set up, and I did want to ask a question here. This was intended to be a question we were going to have you use your text messages to send in, but we ran into a little bit of a technical glitch with the wireless network. But just by a show of hands, how many folks would say that they end up, and we're going to give you 4 different frequencies, how many would say that their touch points with their customers, when I'm talking about customers, not internally within the state, but your customers' customers, so your clients that you serve, how many would say that you actually talk to your customers or touch them in a way on a daily basis by show of hands? The same customer. What about on a weekly basis? What about on a monthly basis? Monthly? And how about whenever there's a problem, they call? Everybody calls whenever there's a problem. That's everybody. These interactions, and that's the one thing that's really that we found is regardless of the frequency of those interactions, whether it's daily or whether it's weekly or monthly or semi-annually or on an as-needed basis, that each of those interactions is actually triggering something that we can develop insights into and get a better understanding about what that customer actually needs. People are looking for increased ways of communicating. They are looking for ways to increase their access channels. They want more tailored communication. We actually had a conversation with a number of agencies across the U.S., and they said in their top 5 lists, the number one thing that most organizations wish that they could do with their data is use it as a way to tailor or personalize messages to their customers. They're looking for a way that it's not necessarily an approach where everybody gets the same communication, everybody has the same touch point, everyone has the exact same method by which they get communicated, because everyone has very specific and unique needs. Some people prefer to get text messages, some people prefer to get phone messages, some people prefer to get things in the paper. But it really depends on an individual and a uniqueness about how you actually are looking to segment out your population. So just by a show of hands also, how would you say that you feel around how well you know your customers? I would say, would folks say that they know their customers very well, know their habits, could anticipate their every move? No, I see someone shaking her head. Do we have the mic, Josh?
We do.
Can you click? I'm going to pick on you because you shook your head.
Okay, who was
So
shaking your head?
We're going to pick on people when they shake their head. No one's going to shake their head from now on. We know what that happens. See, I was anticipating your move because I saw you weren't going to volunteer, but you shook your head. So that's the way I'm segmenting you as one of my customers. But talk a little bit about maybe some of the challenges you have with anticipating what your customer needs.
Well, okay, so first of all, my area is project management.
Okay.
And one of our key services is training, and we also support a project management scheduling system tool for our enterprise project management portfolio, and then teaching them how to use the data to do better project management and schedule management and resource management. So it's a new thing we just implemented over this last year, and then trying to anticipate the needs of the customers. First is how do you use the tool, but behind that was you got to have you have to have project management principles, project schedule management principles already behind that. So we actually ended up having to do training to address both issues, and still finding that the majority of the problems we're finding is still not using the tool so that we can get to the data we need. It's about basic project management scheduling principles. So we're trying to anticipate that. And then in addition, because we purchased a cloud service, our vendor's great, but the speed of change in the system is just phenomenal. Every month it's changing. And so trying to anticipate what we need to tell all the customers about all the changes to the tool is a challenge for us as well. And they're already struggling with applying best practice principles just to develop a good schedule. That
Yes.
few things.
Yeah, and I would say you brought up a good point, that things are changing so rapidly today that trying to keep up and anticipate what people need is usually one of the biggest challenges I say that people face. Every time, whoa, that's better. Every time, now I have to adjust my eyes here a little bit, every time that someone is getting right up to meeting the client's needs or the customer's needs, it changes. And it's constantly changing. And one of the big challenges is, how do you develop those insights about what that person needs based off of the information that you've got in the system, but what are some other things that we could end up using? So we look at, I had mentioned before that there's the transaction data that comes from a lot of our systems today. There's also third-party data that also can be used as well. And we see it sometimes that we use what's called lifestyle-based analytics that you can use to integrate and augment, sometimes to understand what people's behaviors are outside of the immediate purview that you have, that can give you a more complete picture. And these other types of implicit or behavioral that could give a more well-rounded, with the intent of really trying to get to understanding a person and then creating groups or segmenting those groups so that you're tailoring each of them based off of different populations. So it's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all approach to everything, and it can't be so unique that you have 5 million different approaches, but you're really looking at a way that you can segment out the population and tailor your approaches as you go forward.
Agreed. So we've had to take multiple prong approaches: videos, SharePoint, hands-on training, classroom training, one-on-one. We have a help desk function for them to call. But it can be costly, and to keep it all up to date, and we don't have all the resources to be able to really support it all. So it stretches me thin.
So one of the things that we look at when we look at exploring this idea of doing customer segmentation or analyzing your different customers is initially having an idea of what your compass or your true north is. To start off with, what is it that you're trying to solve? We see all too often projects that are not successful where someone will end up procuring a tool and then trying to figure out how to use the tool later on, without having at least an idea of what it is that they want to try to achieve. And it doesn't have to be that every single question is detailed to the nth degree, but at least an idea about an objective about what they're trying to achieve. And think about something like where there's revenues coming into the state. Are you looking for ways that you can attract or retain customers? Is your intention to try to tailor their approach? Are you trying to increase customer satisfaction? But there needs to be a high-level business objective that you're starting with. And then what we do is we go into looking at different data sources. They could be existing systems that you have, augmenting them with things, like I said, around third-party data sources. You have to be a little bit careful around those data sources because at times they can be out of date or the data could be inaccurate. So we've done a lot of testing of different data sets to make sure that that data is actually refining or enhancing what that customer actually looks like. And then after taking a look at data sources is doing population analysis to take an overall look at the population and then defining your segments. Lastly, the big piece is really integrating that then into the overall operations to make sure that you're not just using the analytics to get insights, but then actually you're baking it back into the process. And it could be baked back into a process of, how do I allocate my workload? It could be, in this case, of if I want to communicate with somebody, what's the best method of communicating with them? Maybe we've moved from taking paper documents or when taxes are going out. I know I get my document 6 months in advance that tells me when I'm supposed to file my taxes. I am a creature of habit. I filed them in the last week. Maybe I should get something that's more tailored to when my taxes actually are going to get submitted, as opposed to sending it all out mass mail, because that's more than likely in my household going to go in the trash right away. And that's a lot of money that would have been spent on paper and postage and printing that would have gone out the door. So getting to know the individual habits of people and then tailoring those communications is pretty important. We've done in one state a paperless effort where we've taken customer segmentation and figured out what the best method is of communicating, whether it's text or whether it's email or if it's paper or phone messages or what they call outbound dialing. And what it ended up doing was translating into $1.5 million in annual savings in the first year just on printing and postage costs, nothing else, let alone the workload reduction efforts. It was just purely on printing and postage costs. But it's, again, understanding really what your customer is. It's really about, like I said before, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach to everything. I love this graphic. You have to think about it's tailoring it to the individual, but using it in a way that you're not over-tailoring or over-customizing, because that could get very cost-prohibitive if you get into the point of trying to create too many different customizations. The other thing is we tend to see a lot of times that states will end up saying, and other agencies will say, well, how do I start? What do I need to do? And what we find is that the best thing to think about is it's really a sprint and not a marathon in this case. And what I mean by that is that we look at analytics at ways of defining your first 100 meters or your first 50 meters. That first 100 or 50 meters could influence what your next 100 meters are going to look like. In your next 100 meters, you might find things along the way around your customer population that may give you insights into things that you would want to explore, that if you define your roadmap up front for 3 years going forward, it could be a very different place after your first 3 months of doing your analysis. So we tend to work with our states where we've done this is to look at defining something in small, very agile increments that allow you to get very quick insights and make smaller changes, as opposed to these gigantic transformational changes that take years and months to do. So thinking about the path forward, I'm going to close with this and then turn it over to Brian, is thinking about your customer population is really making sure that you are tailoring your approach, doing so in such a way that you're not creating too many levels of complexity, and doing so in such a way that you're going to be able to gain a lot of insights in short periods of time that you can then use to continue to refine over months. So what I'm going to do now is turn it over to Brian, and Brian is going to talk a bit about program integrity and fraud, waste, and abuse.
Thanks, Rachel. Appreciate it. Thank you. I'm very passionate about fraud, waste, and abuse, and so are David and Rachel. We've sometimes been called the three musketeers of fraud, waste, and abuse. But we're passionate about it, in part because it's such an important area in government, but it's also a really interesting area, one in which the field of analytics really plays, and it's such a hot area. It's an area that's getting more challenging because of cyber. It's an area that's getting easier because of the power of analytics and all the computational capabilities. So and it's not going away. So we'll be around for a while. Part of this is that government. I need to shift. Oh, you're doing it for me? Oh, that's very nice. So it's an area where, from a transparency standpoint, it's fraud, waste, and abuse is really about good government stewardship of the public purse, and you have to take care of that responsibility very seriously, and make sure that all of the rules are followed, that it's consistent with policy, that the investigations are fair, that there's an audit trail. And so a lot of this is also just as much about, it's going to be much about creativity, but it's also about that audit trail, that consistency of approach. So one of the things I think is really important is what is being done today to detect fraud, waste, and abuse. So, because you can't really improve upon anything until you understand what's already in place, right? So right now, largely state governments have tip lines, and there's lots of whistleblower legislation out there. So tip lines are a very important part of it. There's a lot of reliance on audit, probably too much reliance on audit, given the cost of audit and the time that it takes and how you go about it. And there is some degree of claims edits that are sort of in systems based on rules and policies. There is also some activities that we see more and more in the area of pay and chase, where analytics are used after the fact, after things have been paid, to generate recovery. So the money's been paid, it's gone out the door, we go out there, we do analytics, we identify where it looks like it took place, and we go after it. It takes far too much money. The payback is really not what it needs to be. And of course, the future here is to get advanced analytics, to develop models where you can update prepayment types of analytics, where you're stopping payments before they go out the door. So it's really about going from recovery to cost avoidance. And I know we've had some problems with the polling technique, but just by a show of hands, if I were to ask, in this room, the amount of money spent on government programs, right, or government public benefit programs that's attributed to fraud, would you say that's 2%, 5%, 7%, 10%, more? I'm just curious. Who thinks that it's a very low, maybe in the 2% standpoint? Nobody. 5%? Oh, there we go. A couple of optimists. So most of the data shows that it's more around 10%, and that's fraud. And what we've done in most of our exploratory analytics, it's uncanny how that 10% cuts across different programs. It's almost like there's some kind of metaphysical thing that we don't understand, where 10% of any activity seems to be fraud because it shows up repeatedly in different programs. Now, that's not to say there aren't exceptions, but it is a rather important thing. When you think about the size of government, this is not something where we're talking about saving $1 million, a few $1 million here and there. We're talking about billions of dollars on the table, both either to save the taxpayer money or to do other things that you'd like to do and do them better. So this is a really impactful area of government. Next slide. So this is talked a little bit about the complexity of all of this. So when we talk about tip lines, right, part of the future of tip lines might be crowdsourcing, right? So if today you're relying on someone to pick up the phone and give you a call when they see something, the future might be to leverage the crowd to tell you, what's going on. And I thought of a good example that I think that I learned about not too long ago was there was a public university in North Carolina that decided that they wanted to really understand crime on campus, and they wanted to understand how people could get off campus and on campus. So they played a game, and they put something of value in the science lab, and they basically told the entire student body, there's an award for those people that figure out how to get into the science lab, get this object of value, and get it off campus undetected. So for the student body, they got the entire student body focused on the problem, because that was a fun game, and it would a little criminal, get to play a little bit like a criminal game. And what they found out is through the process, there was a winner, but what they also found out was all the ingress, egress, that's the in and off campus kinds of routes, many of which were not documented. So campus security was able to use a game of crowdsourcing to really understand that. Now think about the applications of something like that to government efficiency, using the crowd, using people to understand how people can take advantage. They will your crowd will solve problems for you that in ways that you have never thought of. Just like campus security never anticipated the way that these students would get in off campus. And the U.S. Navy has used this off the coast of Somalia. They played these war games. It was basically game playing, and it's through crowdsourcing that they've eliminated to a very, very large degree piracy off the coast of Somalia. So the applications in government and learning, and we can go beyond the tip line, is I guess what I'm trying to say. Another area is exploratory analytics. So exploratory analytics is really that notion that, sometimes you know what you're looking for, and you set up the data so you can go find whether it's happening. But exploratory analytics is when you don't really know what you're looking for, but you think your data might tell you something. And you might see anomalies in the data that might be very curious and interesting. So for example, something that we did recently in Medicaid fraud is we looked at billing patterns for attendant care. So the attendant care providers, they bill, at a certain regular rate. It's not always the same thing, but it does go up and down slightly. And then we looked at the ones where there were a lot of spikes. About 10% of the attendant cares had pretty significant spikes in their billing patterns. Now, maybe that meant nothing. Maybe it did mean something. So we looked at some of them, and we looked at the first one, the one that was the most anomalous, and we quickly found that the company that was billing those services had 11 tax liens against the company. And let's see if you can guess how those tax liens related to the spikes in payments. It was a almost perfect correlation. Every single time a tax lien was due to the government, their bills for Medicaid services to the government went up. It's kind of, So that's exploratory analytics. You don't know exactly what you're looking for, but you just look at the data. There's anomalies, there's crazy things in the data. You investigate, you find out that you've got a new indicator that you never knew of before. Another one, and the other thing that's important is we all want to move to prepay. And so the idea is that once you can do the exploratory analytics and you see the new indicators and you see what your data is telling you, you can start to take those models and move them into production, so to speak, and stop it in real time. And what we're finding more and more is we're able to move these modeling activities into rules against data that's streaming live very, very quickly. The next slide is, it's about side. I usually, by the way, am one of those people that has very detailed slides about process and technical architectures and all that. So this is a little new for me. So the message of this slide was that cyber is a big enabler of fraud, and it's really important to understand that cyber as an enabler of fraud is not about just coming in through hacking into a system, encryption, stealing someone's password, and things of this sort. Cyber is increasingly done by organized crime. It's increasingly organized and facilitated on the dark web, and it's increasingly done from the inside. There is, I regret to say it, but organized crime deliberately gets people hired into organizations. And they get them hired into organizations so they don't have to hack in, because someone gets hired in, they have a job where they get to touch the data. We were talking about all the different things that you could do. You could go into the pension system and just change everybody's, or change whoever people you want, change their retirement, the time of service by 5 years, and it triggers a whole, more pay. The other thing is you can create fictitious employees. You can, there's so many things that you can do once you can get on the inside. And so cyber is a emerging thing in Medicaid and Medicare. There's a lot of activity on the dark web where actually organized crime actually puts together the beneficiary and the provider and hooks them up through the dark web so that it's happening, while they're being basically put together, so that those are the kinds of schemes that we have to be on top of. So the bottom line is that it's a game of chess. The schemes are evolving. There's a lot of tools out there. They're not auto magic. It really does take the data sciences, people that are passionate about these subjects, that can think creatively, and that can help these tools that are proliferating, whether it's visualization technology, statistical types of tools, and to either know what to program, to know what to go after things that they know to look for, but also to just simply understand data and to be able to look for it in a more scientific manner to go find the kinds of things that you want to detect. And so, there's a poll. Is that my last one? This is the one where I asked the question. There's a question there. I can't see it from this angle. Sorry, I'm going to stand up. We'll end on a poll. I think we'll end on a poll. No, it doesn't have the. I'll ask you the last poll question that we didn't get a chance to put up.
And just be careful if you shake your head because you're going to get a microphone.
Yes.
I'm going to hold myself very, very steady for my last slide.
I raise my hand and I don't shake my head.
Who's talking? Is that Josh? I recognize Josh. I recognize Josh's voice. Yes, Josh.
I'm the
you're
microphone.
advising me. Okay, so
I was advising them, Brian.
So my last question is for all of you out there. What do you suppose are the independent estimates for $1 spent on detecting fraud, waste, and abuse? What is the return on investment on average in terms of return for that? Do you think it's in the, well, I'll give you a choice. $1, for $1 spent, $2, $3,
The price is right.
$3. We got 3 going. All right, $4. Oh, yeah, there goes the cynics. Okay, $5. $6, $7. The prize goes to the $7. Yeah. So $7. It's generally 7 to 1. But I got to tell you, the last project that we did, it was 200 to 1. The last project we did in Medicaid, I mean, maybe we looked at $500 million worth of claims. And it was a 200 to 1. For every dollar spent, we're finding $200 worth of fraud, waste, and abuse. So it's the use of it. I think there's more out there than the typical claims edits we're finding. So I think I'll stop there. Unless there, well, no, we'll take some questions at the end. So David's going to talk a little bit about workforce analytics.
So let me first prove to the group here that analytics works, right? So I just have a little test, right? There's got to be a math test at the end of the day because these are always fun, right? So everybody think of a number between 0 and 10. 0 and 10. Everybody got a number? And we're all good with that number. Now multiply that number by 9. Okay, so now you have a new 2-digit number, right? Now you're going to add those 2 digits that you have in that number, add them together. Right? Got those numbers together? Okay, so now you have a new single-digit number. Now you're going to subtract 5 from that number. Okay, so subtracting 5, you have that number, a single-digit number, right?
Use your calculator.
Right, so everybody with me here, single-digit number. Now correspond that number to a letter in the alphabet. A is 1, B is 2, C is 3, okay? So you got your number now, and you got your letter, right? Your letter corresponding to that number we just came up with, right? So now think of a country that starts with that letter, right? You got a country that starts with that letter that you had in your mind just a minute ago. Okay, got the country. Now take the last letter of that country name and think of an animal, right? Animal that starts with that letter, right? Okay, now take the last letter of the animal and think of a piece of fruit. Okay, so now you have a country, an animal, and a piece of fruit in your mind, right? And now my lovely assistant Felicia here in row 3 is going to flip the sheet of paper there that we had unplanned, and she's going to read the answers on the back there and see how we did.
Denmark, kangaroos, orange.
How many people came up with that answer? There we go. All right. So the first lesson of analytics, 97% of you had that right. It's never 100% accurate. Any predictive model out there that they have, it's never 100% true, right? And the same is true here with workforce analytics. So, right, it's the law of large numbers. We always try to get the best answer. And sometimes it's the 80-20 rule, right? You're going to take the advantage of the 80% right and go forward with it. So
I had koala bear and raspberry.
there's always
That's
a few.
2 words, Josh.
There's always a few koalas in the crowd. Thanks, Josh. And apples. Okay, good. Okay. It's actually koala bear, but that's a different story. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide and talk about some of the foundations of workforce analytics. So, we talk a lot about the technology. Workforce analytics is really about the people dimension, right? So using analytics to better understand the people, whether it be for recruiting purposes, retention. I heard a lot of concern here about training, getting the right education to the right folks in the right medium, right, the way they learn best. So everybody learns differently, we're all different, but if we could target some of these communications and styles to those people where they learn best, that's really the power of it. Now, and there's other foundational pieces here around workforce analytics and workforce planning, right? You want to have all the governance, you want to make sure you're compliant, you want to make sure you have the IT structure. You also want to have the business embrace it, right? So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. Let's go to the next slide here. I'm going to finish on time if it kills me. So the poll question here, and we might, let's skip this one. So everybody heard the phrase garbage in, garbage out. Well, the good news is with analytics, it might not matter that much, right? So even if we have partial data that might be some level of quality, we can still do analytics because of that earlier statement I said, which is right, you're never 100% accurate, but if you have some data. So let me give you an example. So we needed to segment these workforce for purposes of workers' comp claims. All we had was the zip code that they live in. Do you think that was enough data to maybe do better insights than the claims caseworkers were at the time? And the answer was yes. You can learn enough, even just that one bit of information. You can correlate other third-party data with that information and learn an awful lot about folks just from their zip code, right? Okay, we're not talking PII, right? We're going to stay away from that. Not getting into the privacy stuff. We're not doing the credit scoring, none of that, right? Just what you might do on the weekends, right? Another example, large retailer wanted to know if the people running marathons versus the people playing at the casino on the weekend were having more accidents. Those kind of lifestyle-based analytics that Rachel mentioned earlier can really give you good insights into the workforce. The other point about garbage in, garbage out is that nobody really has high-quality data. And you heard earlier this morning in the keynote, fail early, fail fast, fail cheap, right? Because you're going to get another try, right? Not every analytical question is going to be the right question. So you just need to move quickly through some of these early proof of concepts that we call them. Let's go on. Different levels of analytics, you kind of work up the food chain here. I think a lot of organizations are still developing these capabilities. And I think the point here is just, it's a journey, right? So yes, you have to have good operational reporting. Yes, you have to have good insights into your data. The predictive analytics is a very, different skill set. And sometimes organizations can build that internally. Other times there's external sources that you can bring in. But it is different skill sets for each of these kind of levels of analytics. Now let's go on. Within workforce analytics, there's a lot of different aspects of it here, and I want to just focus on 3 of them. First of all, we talked about like the recruiting piece, but really onboarding. What do you need to inform folks on when they come on board into the new organization? What's their best learning style as we talk about learning and development efforts? And really, how do you develop leaders that are going to be successful with that group, within your workforce? All of these kind of aspects kind of go into this workforce strategy, if you will, and they're all things that need to be considered equally as you begin to use analytics and data to really help improve outcomes, right, of the people dimension of the organization. Let's go on. There's 4 different kind of key tenets here that we talk about that you need for success. One is obviously the knowledge around your talent, right? That's a key. A lot of people call it the business side, but it's really that kind of knowledge. The analytics expertise, right? To know what are the insights in the data, which are, false positives, if you will. What are kind of those fake trends and which are the real trends? So kind of being able to understand the data. The technology as well, right? There's a different skill set there around technology, understanding the data structures, how to create perhaps synthetic variables within the data. The other aspect that we don't talk a lot about is just the user design. How do you, as Rachel said, how do you operationalize some of these analytics? You got to have people be able to interface with these systems, understand them, so that they become very intuitive. And that also gets to some of the training challenges we have with all this dynamic change going on in the rate of change. So that user design, we find, is almost equally important in the systems that people are using around workforce. Final slide here, just again, kind of the final, go fast, right? Try something quick. It might fail, but it'll be so educational going through that process. And like Brian, I was trying to understand this photo, but anyway, it's a good theme to end on, which is just kind of go fast.
Except fail fast. I don't have a lot of experience.
No, fail fast, but find value in those small projects, right? You don't need to boil the ocean, as we say. And then on that next slide, it is baby steps, right? So do a proof of concept. Get your vendors engaged with some skin in the game, right, to help develop those solutions and those answers. And as Rachel said, show me something I don't already know, right? I know this information about my workforce. I know that we have challenges here. Bring me some new insights that will allow me to make better business decisions going forward. And finally, get some quick wins, right? You need the quick wins early so that you can build the momentum for those larger analytic opportunities that are going to emerge after you do those small ones. So with that, I'm going to stop on time, hopefully, here and open it up for questions, or back to Rachel for questions.
Yeah, just in closing, I will say that we actually did use some little bit of analytics when we were preparing for today's session. We actually did a little bit of customer segmentation analysis on all of you before we came in. So when we were choosing the topics today, we did take a look at who the audience was going to be, what would most likely align with what some of your needs were. So we actually are using it a lot of times when we're also doing audience analysis as well. So not just customer, but when you're interacting with people, it's really helpful to get a good idea of who your end audience is too. So with that, I'm just going to open it up if there's any questions. I know that we're between you all and the final closeout today, but if there's any questions that you may have, we would be happy to take them.
I'm just curious, what was your audience analytics outcome?
What our analysis actually resulted in? So the 3 topics.
Most of you shop at Costco.
We knew that the majority of people would sit in the back half of the room. That is actually, that's probably more 100% predictive analytics, I would say, than anything else, that the majority of people would sit in the back of the room, and we would have to force audience participation. Actually, we did take a look, and one of the things that we did take a look at was levels, because there were a number of people from all different levels of the organization, so we wanted to make sure that we were looking at not just the folks that were at the top, but involved in middle, as well as people that are involved day to day. We took a look at who your population was. We know that internally some of you have customers, some of you have external citizens or residents of California. So we had to look at who that population would end up being. Not everyone has concerns about fraud, but some people have concerns about waste and abuse. We wanted to make sure that we touched on those as well. So we tried to, I look at it as a salad bar. There's little bits and pieces that I use to make my salad, and that's actually what we did today when we were putting together the presentation. So all of you are pieces of a salad, and together we have a nice chef salad.
And if there's no more questions, we have a short video we can actually show you as you depart today to maybe trigger a few more thoughts about what you might think about.
Anybody have any questions?
Other questions? Don't want to cut anybody off from asking.
Okay.
We knew that there were going to be very few questions based on the customers.
Yes, highly predictive. We modeled that before we came.
So we planned a video.
Video is always good to finish with. Thanks, Jules.
Which one of you is the crouton in the
That's salty.
I'm glad you asked. The crouton is you.
Why don't you guys act it out for us?
That's pretty much what we're gonna be
Thanks,
doing here, right?
Thanks, Josh. That's very helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Josh.
Does it work?
It worked before. Yeah.
It's just you gotta get it to show.
Here we go. Here we go. Oi.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank you all.
everybody. Thanks, everybody.